because, create more jobs to really try and pull America out of this pretty drastic recession they've been in?
I agree with Lachlan. QE2 is just a disaster. QE1 was a disaster. Every QE that's ever happened, look at Weimar Republic in Germany, look at Zimbabwe, it always ends badly.
Oh, God, it's not like those two examples, is it?
Well, money printing's money printing, Helen. The problem the US has had is simply too much debt buying, paying too much for too many assets. And the Fed's solution and Bernanke's solution is to create more debt. It's so laughably stupid that it will never work. It's an absolute disaster. The only beneficiaries of this are, as Lachlan mentioned, investment banks who can basically borrow money for free and then lend it back for the government for 3%, and that's where these billion-dollar investment bank profits are coming from in the US. It's an absolute arbitrage because you're getting money for free and you're lending it back to a risk-free investor for a couple of percent more.
I mean, the way you describe it, it's criminal.
The problem is most people simply, Helen, you're right, the average person on the street has no idea what quantitative easing actually does, and it simply reduces the value of your current dollars. If you're a 70-year-old who worked your whole life, saved $100,000, $200,000 in your bank account, that's suddenly worth a lot less because there's a lot more dollars about. And this is the problem when Nixon went off the gold standard finally in '71. The creation of this fiat currency system where a government can simply print money ends in disaster every time. And one thing that's very rarely mentioned is the US Fed isn't really a complete government instrument. It was a creation of, basically a cartel of the US banks. It was created in 1913. JP Morgan was involved in its startup with a bunch of wealthy bankers. It's got a quasi-governmental role, and there is legislation that enshrines it, but it's not a government body, and that most people don't even realise that. And you look at the history of the Fed, and a lot of the...
But sorry, it is a central bank. But you're saying it was started from the banks, the big commercial banks.
It's effectively it's the banker's bank, and it was started by JP Morgan and some commercial bankers, and effectively exists to protect bankers' interests.
Right, so it's not really a central bank as most of us understand what a central bank might be. And Adam, does this have a sort of a direct correlation to what's happened in these midterm US elections? Because, of course, the Republicans, we know, have done so well in the House particularly. And, the crux, I guess, the basic point of their whole message and all the rallies and all that sort of thing has been, cut the debt, cut the spending. Now, from what you're saying is that the Fed's just going on its merry way to do precisely what the American people really don't want them to do, or the ones who voted for the Republicans.
Yeah, well put. I think the one point to note is, though, is Obama's an easy target, and he certainly hasn't been an outstanding president, but much of this deficit was a result of Bush's spending, Bush's war spending, rightly or wrongly, whether to support the war or not. It's certainly not good for the economy, creating a huge spending hole.
Well, that's Obama's, right. It's not all been done in the last, 2 years since Obama got in. A lot of it was left over from the Bush administration too.
I think part of the problem...
Go ahead, Adam, and then...
Sorry, I'll say Obama inherited a basket case. Sorry, Lachlan, you go.
I was just going to say that...
kind of was at work here. I mean, yes, we might say certainly as Australians, the Canadian government was being far too heavy-handed. But did BHP kind of make strategic errors and maybe should have increased their bid to at least allow the board and the company to be a bit more open to this deal?
I don't know if it was whether a price consideration should come into it, whether Canada or any country accepts a takeover.
Meaning if the board was a bit more sort of open to it, then they
possibly,
might have, the politicians might have listened to them.
Yeah, possibly a friendly merger probably would have had more chance. I guess for a start, BHP share market cap jumped by several billion yesterday, so clearly the market loves the fact that the merger doesn't go like it usually does. The market hates mergers. People who love mergers are CEOs and boards and investment bankers.
Investment bankers, of course.
But if you look at this, is Marius Kloppers, who by all reports is a very smart man, one of McKinsey's youngest ever partners, has now blown 3 deals, costing shareholders $1 billion. All 3 deals, when they've collapsed, the share price has gone up. Arguably, the Rio Tinto joint venture would have been probably a good deal. But the Rio merger and the Potash merger, the market hated. this is what Marius Kloppers is there for, to allocate shareholders' capital effectively.
All right, so you're saying he is in the wrong?
Oh, well, the market certainly thinks that. If this is a man getting paid $10 million and the market's applauding when his ventures fail.
I know, all right.
What's he doing?
All right, well, is this a kind of a perfect example, I guess, of what happens in several companies? But this is a good example of where perhaps the shorter-term interests of some shareholders are quite at odds with the longer-term interests of the board and management. I mean, Marius Kloppers clearly wants to, and look, I'm not necessarily defending him, let me just put this view out there, that he clearly wants to position BHP in the future. He sees this particular company or this sector or both as a good way to position for future strategic security for BHP. The shareholders say, no, we don't like all this money being spent. Can't you actually give us some back? It is that perfect example of this kind of locking of horns.
Is it short-termism versus long-termism, perhaps? Adam?
Oh, I guess that's assuming that every shareholder, Helen, is a short-term. There's certainly some are.
No, okay, but you're saying sorry, Adam. I'll just say one more point. You're saying they applauded the knocking back of the deal. Yes, and is that because they want the money returned to them?
Well, I guess as a share, if I was an investor, I'm not an investor in BHP, but if I was, I'd want BHP to allocate its capital how I can get the best return. If BHP can get a good return from Potash, fantastic, invest in Potash. My guess is the investors are looking at the price BHP were paying and saying, that price is too high, give that money back to us, I'll do what I want with it. I don't want you investing my money as a BHP shareholder in an overpriced acquisition, which it would have done in Rio, which it possibly would have done in Potash. There's nothing wrong with acquisitions if they make sense. The problem is the vast majority of acquisitions don't make sense. They're done for the wrong reasons. They're encouraged by investment banks. Look at Foster's and the other company Escapes that's now splitting up. 10 years ago, we should merge. Foster South. But there's another company just in the last couple of days that announced a demerger. And
don't worry, I can't think of it either.
It'll come to me, but. Acquisitions are a great flavour of the month when they're up, and investment bankers are getting great fees. But often these acquisitions don't make sense. Synergies don't exist. Who benefits is executives are managing a bigger company, and most executives are remunerated based on market capitalisation of the company. So it's in the executives' interest to make. There is, and there's nothing that makes the blood boil more than a LBO run by current executives of the business. We saw it with Alinta. About 3 years ago, and I think John Poynton had to leave. It's not illegal, but it leaves a shocking taste in your mouth when you see Nick Falloon getting paid $4 million to run 10, at the same time as he's getting paid to do that, scheming with an investment bank and a massive private equity fund to buy the business from the shareholders, presumably for a price that he thinks is going to be a good deal for him. I hate it. It's barbarians at the gate stuff. It's not illegal, but you got to wonder who are these directors acting for? They're acting for themselves or acting for the company? If he wants to take out the company, resign and launch a bid in association with Powers and Hellman, but to do it from a position of an executive chairman even, it's a very unsightly. And Fairfax didn't really go into detail about that surprisingly today. It was a great story, but it's not nice to see.
Not a good look. Not happen with 10.
I think I've heard reports that Packer is very much in favour of cutting the news and current affairs.
Yeah.
That was, I think, one of his main. I think sport was secondary. Cutting the hour of news. News is expensive, and look at what Packer did when he was running Nine. I think his sale of Nine was one of the best ever divestments Australia's seen, certainly in the last decade. But he doesn't love running TV stations like Kerry does. He won't want an expensive newsroom. That'll go. One might go or might be changed. And there's a lot of fat to cut from 10. The 1HD.
The digital channel, yeah.
Well, it's been around for about 2 years. 11's the new one. Yeah. But yes, I think there's a lot of fat to cut at 10, and Packer will certainly will do so to make the most. His investment's $200 million, which is a pretty small fraction of his wealth.
And may well bring Lachlan Murdoch in if you believe news.
I think Alan Joyce has actually been a brilliant CEO of Qantas, not just today and yesterday, but since he's taken over. I think Jeff Dixon gets a lot of plaudits, but Joyce he built up Jetstar. He's done a great job at Qantas, and you're right, who would want to own an airline? I wouldn't touch it. You've got to spend so much on capital, you're at risk at oil prices, you're at risk at every financial shock.
Disease and all sorts of things.
it's the last business I'd buy. Warren Buffett said he'll never buy an airline. He bought US Air in about '89 and regretted it ever since.